Right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so I just handed out this sheet, and I want to kind of want you to make sure that you understand like how I've organized it and why I've got it this way. So we've got several different parts and things that we're going to talk through. This is yours. I don't care what you write down. I don't care if you write anything down. It's really like it's up to you. I will tell you I'm going to cover some things that aren't in the textbook though, so there are some things that I'm going to add. So as we work our way through the election process, we're going to get a little history because you cannot understand the insanity that is today if you don't understand the insanity of the past and figure out why we have the system we have. We will talk through the primary or nomination season, which is what we'll cover today. Then we've got this general election season or the campaign season. We will try to understand the Electoral College if at all possible. And then at the bottom, what I've done is I've given you a timeline. We're not going to put like specific dates or anything on there, but that's just so we can kind of put it into context. When we talk about the different events of that process, you can just kind of label. And like always, the questions that you love are there on the back, right? Okay, so we are going to start here then. So our focus will be on the presidency. Doesn't mean that we will only talk about the presidency. We can talk about other stuff as well. Like Peyton always says, you know, like we mistakenly pay so much attention to the presidency, but because that is the most complicated part of our process and it's the part that the media will pay the most attention to, I want to make sure you understand that, but we can also talk about all that other voting stuff. The other thing is, very big deal, I want you guys to feel comfortable when you vote. How many of you got to vote in November? Like none of you. Okay. Um, I have to be honest, it's like a little bit intimidating the first time you go. And even me who was like, I mean, like I was so excited to vote. It's like such a big deal. It's like when you go and you look at the ballot, there's just I feel like it's a little intimidating. And I have friends who for like years wouldn't vote because they just felt uncertain. I remember the first time my husband came out from voting after he got his citizenship, he was like, okay, we gotta do more research before the next election. He was like, I wasn't quite sure what to do on all the offices, and I don't know, I just want you to feel comfortable when you do it, so that you understand how to do it. Jared, what was your question? Okay, and hopefully we can combat that as well. Is there a reason you did it? Just weren't interested. Yeah, and you know what? This election was definitely like that. It was an election that really turned people off. And we'll talk about those options as well. Like if it's presidential election year and you don't like any of those candidates, well, what can you do? Because there are definitely options. I have friends, people you know, who wrote in candidates, who voted for certain offices and not others. So there's kind of like always a way for you to participate in a way that makes you feel comfortable. And so we'll look at some ballots and things like that. Okay, so before we start then, let's make sure we understand, not just about the president. Your ballot that you have every November in even numbered years will have local elections on it. That could be for city council. That could potentially be for mayor. It could be for like sometimes for issues that your city is voting on. If you guys remember, we voted about having liquor store no selling liquor no it was liquor stores about like would we allow liquor stores in Frisco, like that was on the ballot. Sometimes there was one year that had to do with pawn shops, I believe. Yeah, like, so just different kinds of issues like that. School board sometimes will show up on your ballot. Now sometimes those are separate elections, but sometimes they'll also put them on your ballot depending on where you live. We have county offices. You vote for sheriff, you vote for county judges, you vote for the person that collects our property taxes is an elected position in Texas. So there's so many different people there. We have state offices in Texas. We happen to have more than the average state. We separately elect our governor and lieutenant governor. Much of the governor's cabinet is not appointed, they're actually elected. We have a railroad commissioner and basically like the person that's like a state accountant and an attorney general, and all of those people show up on the ballot. They're not people that are appointed. So at the federal level, we actually don't elect a lot. We have president and vice president, Senate sometimes, and House of Representatives, and that's it. So in a given year, you might have like 60 things on your ballot, but very few of them are actually at the federal level. Why are all of these things on our ballot? One word answer. And 50% of the time, that is the answer in this class. Why do we have local offices, state offices, and national offices. Oh, federalism. Awesome. Very good. Because every level of government has a right, they have sovereignty. There's certain things they're in charge of. That means that they have a right to create positions that are going to enforce those laws, create those laws, adjudicate those laws, etc. So federalism is why you have this. If you don't live in a federal country, your ballot doesn't look like this. You have very few things in which to vote for. So remember we said that federalism gives us all these access points to government, but it also complicates it because now we have a whole lot of people, okay? The other thing we want to make a difference between is the presidential election and the midterm election. All right, so this throws people for some reason, and I'm not quite sure why. Presidents serve a 4-year term. So we had an election in 2016. President Trump will stay in office until 2020. So 2016 and 2020 are presidential election years. 2024, 2028, okay? Midterms are the 2 years, it's the 2 years in between where we vote for everything else except for president. So in 2018 is the next time, is the time that most of you will be eligible to vote for the first time. If you are still in Texas, our gubernatorial, like our governor's position, will be up for re-election. So you will vote for a governor and a lieutenant governor. One of our senators will be up for re-election. House of Representatives always. And then all of this other stuff. So you just won't have a president on your ballot that year. Then in 2020, you'll have everything on your ballot. Not a governor if you're in Texas, but in a different state you might. So it just depends on like what your state has done. Some years, some offices are 2-year offices, and so every 2 years they're up. Presidents, because they're 4, okay, so we do like that. Senate is a 6-year term, so only some of them are on the ballot, depending on how we've staggered it and set it up. Does that make sense? Okay, so if I were to ask you to define the difference in a presidential election and a midterm election, Andrew, how would you say, what's the difference in a presidential election and a midterm election?
The time spans where presidential elections take place every 4 years and midterms are every 2. Presidential elections are where you vote for presidents, and then midterms are where you vote for the positions or offices other than the president.
Okay. In a presidential election year, am I going to have all the other stuff on my ballot? Do I only vote for president, or do I vote for president and everything else? President and everything else. And so that's the key. That's what people mistakenly say when they go to define it or they write it down. They say, because it's what it sounds like. In a presidential election year, you vote for president. In a midterm, you vote for Congress and everything else. But in a presidential election year, I voted for House of Representatives in 2016, even though it was a presidential year. I just also got to vote for a president. Okay? Are we good? Okay. All right. So here you got a little chart. I know it's not very big. The green shows you voter turnout in a presidential election year, and this is in 1964. The yellow shows you the midterm. So this is what percentage of the population, 70%, and about 55% voted in the midterm. About 68% voted in the presidential, about 54% voted in the congressional cycle. Okay? Why does a lower percentage of the population show up to vote in a midterm versus a presidential election year? Peyton?
I think it's because it's like not as like covered as much. Like most people don't know who they're voting for. Like
Okay.
I know certain people that just walked in like they would vote for president and they just like put random answers because they didn't know who they needed to for.
Good. That makes sense. People know, they don't know as much. They know about the president because that's more pervasive in the media. You have to actively try to investigate some local office and candidates. I mean, you got to look into it. It's not just going to pop up on your Twitter feed. So, what else? What do you think, Aaron? Give me another reason.
Maybe not as publicized as much as presidential.
Media for sure plays a big role in it. There's so much money poured into it with the presidential election. I think the other. Go ahead, Jared.
More fear of like someone bad getting in.
Yeah, it could definitely be that because I think we mistakenly view the president as so powerful. We forget like how limited the presidency is, and we forget about all the things that state and local government do for us. Now, the president has some powers that are incredibly powerful. And I think historically, when we study history, we always think of it in terms of presidents. So it's just kind of our culture has really shifted. If I were to show you this chart from the very beginning, average voter turnout was consistently higher for Congress than it was for the president. Because remember in the articles, there was no president. And so when they first had elections, like high voter turnout for Congress, and in the presidential election year, it was significantly lower. When we started shifting and paying more attention to the president about the time of Abraham Lincoln, we saw it flip. And then people started paying more attention to the president and less attention to Congress. Okay? All right. So we're good? All right. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to move on. I'm going to come around to you guys, and I'm going to give you a series of strips which give you an overview of the presidential election cycle from beginning to end. You guys read about this, and so all I want you to do is to take those strips and as a group, put them in sequential order from what you think happens in the beginning down to we've got a president, and then we'll check and see how you are. Okay?